Peace, family. This is the Drapetomaniac Podcast, and this is Ayapo Yapa, the HDIC, that is, the head Drapetomaniac in charge. And we're here to have conversations on how to get off this plantation. Today, I saw a short clip of a white police officer arresting a black woman and almost drowning her in the process. I was outraged, just as I always am. The man who filmed the murder of Ahmaud Arbery has now been charged with murder. Breonna Taylor was murdered in her own home. In Ohio, specifically Franklin County, racism has been declared a public health crisis. And so the story goes. We were outraged, we are outraged, and we will be outraged
Excuse
again.
me. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that you listeners are listening to the Drapetomaniac Podcast on doayamedia.com. You are, right?
Now, I only shake my head and wonder what it'll take for our people to stop looking to the system that deliberately perpetrates this terror and violence upon us to somehow also be the system that will remedy the situation, as opposed to us looking to ourselves and our own people and our own community, even as disjointed as it presently is. When engaging people on any given subject, it's important to understand their fundamental belief system. In other words, knowing where they're coming from. If you're having a discussion with someone about some issue of morality and the foundation of your argument is God, the Bible, and spirituality, if you're talking to someone who is a staunch atheist, then the conversation will lead to a dead end. Likewise, if your fundamental premise is from a position of faith and belief in God or whatever higher power in which you believe, and the person with whom you're speaking is approaching you from the standpoint of all of us being a happenstance of the universe, and that there's nothing more to it, then the conversation is likewise doomed. I said that to say the foundational premise of Doaya Media in general, and the Drapetomaniac Podcast specifically, is that the argument put forth by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing is correct, and that white people inherently have a fear of genetic annihilation. And based upon that conclusion, there is no way to ever bypass or overcome the obstacle in which in any way there can be peace or integration with them. If the fear of genetic annihilation is true, as she asserted, and with which I concur, then that is the explanation for why white people so aggressively oppress and terrorize black people. It's the reason that they seem to have an irrational obsession with us. I've said many times, and I'm known for consistently emphasizing, that white people can't leave us alone. Not won't, can't. I've explained that now when they come at us, or when they come into our spaces for no other purpose than to disrupt us or cause some kind of chaos, I genuinely don't even get angry about it anymore. Sure, it's annoying, but when one realizes that they literally cannot help themselves, it changes a person's perspective. That isn't to say that I condone it in any way or that it's all right. It's just saying that what they do by nature, and because of an inherent issue that lies within them over which they have little to no control. It seems like the eternal hope and belief of our people is that we could just explain enough, or if we could just reason enough, or help white people somehow feel our pain enough, or we could pull up our pants enough, or speak a certain way, behave a certain way, etc., etc., etc. We can make their attitudes and perspectives toward us change. Our people seem to hope against hope that white people will one day wake up and snap out of whatever funk they've been stuck in seemingly from the time that they've existed on the planet. We hope against hope that they will one day stop calling police on us for carrying out daily activities that human beings tend to do as a course. Barbecuing, mowing lawns, sitting under trees, reading, sitting, in spaces waiting for our children, moving into new houses, swimming, golfing, walking, running, standing, sitting, etc., etc., etc. We hope against hope that they will at long last acknowledge our right to exist. By the way, without once asking ourselves the question, why do we so desperately seek their approval or even care whether they acknowledge us or not, as long as they leave us alone? The problem is that no amount of explaining, no amount of seeking to have them exude empathy or sympathy toward us or to gain their acceptance will ever happen, because there's one obstacle that stands in their way and cannot be moved: the fear of genetic annihilation. I pose the question: if 1 + 1 + 1 + 4 = 7, is there any scenario in which 1 + 1 + 1 + 4 can ever equal anything but 7? I quickly add this condition: none of the parameters can be changed. No numbers can be added to it, and none can be subtracted from the equation, and no numbers can be substituted or changed. There's a saying that the definition of insanity is when one does the exact same thing over and over, but at some point expects a different result. If the foundation of racism, white supremacy, or as I prefer to say, the system of white supremacy, is based upon the fear of genetic annihilation, and there is no way for that factor to change because white people are going to be white, and that parameter does not alter, if that parameter does not change, then the consequences of it also remain the same. 1 + 1 + 1 + 4 = 7, and it will always equal 7. As long as white people are white, and they know inherently, consciously or subconsciously, as well as epigenetically, that they are always in danger of being wiped out as a race, there's no way to reconcile that with any kind of possible change in their thinking, attitudes, or psychology. Again, everything comes down to fundamental premises and what one believes as their jump point. If you don't believe that there's any validity to the argument for the fear within white people of genetic annihilation, then none of this will mean anything to you, and that's fine. But if you do feel that there's some credence to this argument, then this is the point upon which the substance of the reasoning rests. As we point back to Neely Fuller when he said, if you don't understand white supremacy, racism, everything that you do understand will only confuse you. That statement becomes more stark and actually can prompt you to seek the correct foundational premises about anything, from why a politician does what they do to why someone in an interpersonal relationship does what they do. For example, if a person believes that the people who are at the highest levels of government are there trying to improve the country and to be the public servants that they were elected to be, then nothing they do will ever make any sense to them. And I guarantee you, you'd spend countless sleepless nights attempting to square what they do with your perception of what you fundamentally believe about them. However, if you see them as self-serving, bought and paid for corporate puppets that have zero concern for you, your well-being, or what you want or need, and that their only concern is to do the bidding of their 1% masters, and to continue holding their positions of power and influence while ravaging the country as much as possible, then suddenly everything they do will start to make sense, and it'll start to line up. The same is true of realizing that the fear of genetic annihilation is a driving force behind the system of white supremacy, and suddenly it will make sense to you why no matter how much we try to prove we're worthy of existing, we're still treated with little to no regard, placed below the level of animals when it comes to our plight and our treatment in society. The fact that we could be enslaved, terrorized, raped, oppressed, imprisoned for little or nothing, endlessly harassed, marginalized, demonized, and gunned down in broad daylight or in our own homes, no matter whether it's a black man, woman, or child, and there is little to no outrage, no real outrage from white people. If you believe that white people are just people like us and that there's only one race, the human race, then the actions I just listed and a mountain of others will never make any kind of sense to you. But if you internalize that they are a violent, brutal, frightened people who fear above all things their genetic extinction and will do anything and everything for their own survival and for the survival of their race, then suddenly everything they do and their insatiable lust for power and control over everything in which they come into contact, especially their irrational hatred for our people, will start to line up and make sense. Why must we have to prove that we're worthy of existing? Why must we be perfect? Even in discussions among our own people, we give the impression that unless we are perfect, every I dotted, every T crossed, then we don't have the right to live, or worse, we deserve the nonstop abuse that we're subjected to. I have long ago stopped being embarrassed by or accepting responsibility for anything done by individual black people for two reasons. Number one, it is because that we are individual black people. Black people are not a monolith. And number two, I've started taking into consideration that nothing that happens among our people, and I mean nothing, happens within a vacuum. We are born, raised, and exist within a system that by design has our people at the bottom of a caste system and which trains us in various ways to hate ourselves and to hold ourselves to little or no value. Here's the trick, boss, that we've been duped into entering. When one of our people does something wrong, it's seen as an indictment on our entire race. When many of us do exceptional things, they are only applied to the one individual who actually did it. However, when it comes to white people, it's completely reversed. When they have literally hundreds of mass shooters, they're promoted as lone wolves who do not represent the collective. But when one white person does something exceptional or of note, it's immediately applied globally to their entire race. And not only their people, but our people have been trained to hold those views. That's a nice little piece of sleight of hand. And our people have unfortunately bought into it. I actually hear other black people boldly declaring that those of us who proudly proclaim ourselves as pro-black are race-baiting hypocrites when we go in hard on race soldiers who indiscriminately murder our people, but we don't address black-on-black crime, a term which is problematic in itself and is a myth. The problem is that there is a logical fallacy there that those who push that rhetoric are missing. That statement portends that no black people address the issue of crime within our own community, which is patently untrue. There are many church, community, and organizational leaders, in addition to individuals who have as their express mission addressed the problem of crime in our own community. And there are others who are like Q Butter, like the STEP program, and organizations like New Era Detroit, and there are many splinter groups that not only address the needs of the community in that way, but also seek to head off the crime problem before it gets started by dealing with the young people. The other part of the fallacy is that if a person is talking about a specific situation, then they are somehow obligated to address some other situation. In other words, coming down on a black person for addressing the atrocities committed against our people by white people, but not addressing so-called black-on-black crime, would be tantamount to telling the American Heart Association that what they say or promote doesn't carry any weight because it does not address the problem of cancer. The American Cancer Society deals with cancer. The American Heart Association deals with the heart. Burger King sells burgers. KFC sells chicken. You wouldn't go to KFC and chastise them because they don't serve burgers, would you? Some pro-black spokesmen address the crime problem within our own community. Some pro-black spokesmen address the crime problem that is committed against our people by those outside our community. We each have our own field of battle in this war upon us. Those of our people who criticize members of the pro-Black community for various stances we take in different areas may want to strongly consider the wisdom of staying in one's own lane and being active in the area in which they feel they are best suited. Everyone isn't geared toward dealing with the corporate and government powers. Everyone isn't geared toward dealing with gang members and people who are incarcerated. Some aren't geared toward dealing with the decay within. Some aren't geared toward dealing with the decay without. It would do us all well to find the field of battle to which we are best equipped, to be an asset to our people and our community, and to fight on that front and let others fight on theirs. It is through constant conditioning that we've been taught to blame ourselves and our people for our condition outside the context of the system of white supremacy that created and perpetuates the condition. Because Black people do not suffer from the fear of genetic annihilation, our worldview is markedly different from that of white people. We are not preoccupied with conceiving ways to preserve ourselves beyond the normal bounds of reproduction, nor do we feel the need to enslave and oppress others, and sadly, this is one of our greatest weaknesses, the inability to actually get into the head of those who seek to oppress us and wipe us out of existence. When we think about them, we project our values onto them and believe that since we don't feel that oppositional way toward them for no reason, and that we see them as just as human as we are, that we can somehow persuade them to see us in the same way. While they, whether aware of their motivations or not, understand that the equation cannot be changed because they always will be white and have a fear of genetic annihilation, and that will always exist within them. Therefore, their goal is not to integrate with us, which would hasten their demise as a race. Their goal, because they have embraced at least that aspect of who they are, they don't seek to level the field, as we have been trying to get them to do for centuries. Their goal is not to make the game fair or even equitable. It is to control the game and every aspect of it. That is why they are so easily frightened and manipulated, as we've just seen with this manufactured pandemic. That is why every natural resource by which they are surrounded, they seek to somehow try to control or quote unquote master, as the term goes. That is why every people who come into contact with them, they seek to enslave in some way. It is all about control and will always be about control for them, because there's no way for them to change the parameter or the equation for them being white and in fear of slipping into non-existence as a race. They realized that a long time ago and took action. I think it's time that we internalize it ourselves and start dealing with the situation accordingly. Finally, when you consider things, above all, do everything in your power to see that your foundational premise is correct. Because if your foundational premise is erroneous, then everything that develops from it will be equally, if not even more so, flawed. Separation is the answer for our people. The only answer. Thank you for listening to the Drapetomaniac podcast. This is Ayapo Yapa, the HDIC, that is, the head Drapetomaniac in charge. And as always, I'll see you on the run.
And thank you again for listening to the Drapetomaniac podcast. Tune in next week at doiamedia.com. DOIAMEDIA.com. And again, we'll catch you on the run. Peace.